Hollywood to the rescue. But what if they don't want to be rescued? I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And gentlemen, there is a church building in New York called West Park Presbyterian Church that the congregation has kind of grown small over the years and has decided that they can no longer afford the upkeep on this old kind of architecturally interesting building. And they have decided to sell it to a developer and use the proceeds. The offer was some $30 million. Use the proceeds to fund good deeds for the poor, homeless, shelters, food, kitchens, things like that. And but just in the nick of time, our friend Mark Ruffalo, along with Amy Schumer, Common, and Wendell Pierce, who's also an actor that some of our audience may have seen, have stepped in to prevent this congregation from selling their building, because not only is it such an architectural treasure, but the building gets used by a little arts group called the Center at West Park, or West Park Center, something like that, to do little performance kinds of events. And so what I found interesting about this, Stephen Green, was the quote from Mark Ruffalo. I believe I read this in the New York Times, but here's the quote from Mark Ruffalo about what he is attempting to do here. He said, "This is what I do, man. I use my platform to speak for people who are being abused by a system that has kept them out, that doesn't give them a voice, that we never get to hear from." Steve, for the life of me, I can't figure out who the abused people are that he's attempting to speak for. I mean, this little congregation wants to sell their building and give the proceeds to the poor. The developer's going to tear it down and build luxury apartments there. And as far as I can tell, Ruffalo thinks two things. Number one, it's nice architecture and it's a significant looking building, and so we should want to keep it around. And he actually says at one point that he may never have had an acting career if it weren't for little places like this where an actor could go and perform because of this arts group that's using the church building for this purpose. Steve, should outside influencers like these Hollywood actors be able to step in and deprive a congregation of its right to sell its own building and give the money to the poor?
What a farting ice hole. What an untrammeled jackwagon Mark Ruffalo is. I mean, you've already told me that the good works that this church plans to do with the money, and it's a church. I trust they will do that with the money. But this is it with the lefties. Everything has to be stasis. Everything that was, is, and shall always be. And we have to codify that stuff into law. The weather isn't allowed to change. We're going to pass laws to protect the weather. A building once built, if they like it, can never be unbuilt. I think the most beautiful skyscraper maybe ever built is the Chrysler Building. There's something about,
without question.
There's something about that Art Deco Gothic look that just I love it. I wish that Frank Lloyd Wright believed that skyscrapers should be built out in the middle of the prairie so that you could see the whole thing, and not be clustered together in cities, which is impractical as hell. The whole reason you build a skyscraper is because of population density. There's absolutely no reason to go through that expense in a prairie. But he was a bit of a dreamer, and we need people like that. That said, I read an article a few years ago that the owners of the Chrysler Building, which might be like in Dubai or Kuwait now, I can't remember for the life of me who it was, are having trouble leasing out the office space because it's a building that was designed a long time ago, and just the interior, things you can't change, like ceiling heights, are no longer desirable. I've got 8 or 9 foot ceilings instead of the huge 12, 13 foot ceilings that the fancy offices want, or the billionaires want for their lofty condos and all the rest. And it dawned on me in a way it never had before, that someday, because that real estate is so valuable, the Chrysler Building is going to have to come down. It's going to have to happen. If that happens in my lifetime, it's going to break my heart. It's so beautiful. It's such a work of art. But it's architecture. It's not a painting you can hang on the wall. When something better has to replace it, something better will replace it, and that day will come. And I'm not going to use my platform to whine about the oppressed, who, if they ever dared to touch me, I would, if I were Mark Ruffalo, I would not use my platform to try and protect this building that sometime is going to have to come down. It's not my business. My business as a human being is to enjoy that beauty and appreciate that beauty while it's there. And part of what makes things beautiful is that, just like human life, it's not forever. And jackholes like Mark Ruffalo will never understand that.
Bill Whittle, I think what appealed to me about this story is it had a certain man bites dog characteristic. Because normally you would hear stories about, the neighborhood wants an eyesore torn down, but the owner doesn't want to have it torn down, But in this case, it's the neighbors who are trying to prevent the owners from doing what they please with the building. And part of their battle here is because of this building has been declared to be architecturally significant, and it raises an interesting question about who owns a building. If you build something in the 1800s that comes to be seen as typifying an era of, Romanesque architecture or whatever that is valued, do you as the owners lose your ability to dispose of this building as you see fit because the community now has a greater interest in retaining it, despite the fact that most of the other architecture from that era has been torn down and replaced by skyscrapers?
No, you don't have the right. The person who owns the building is the person who owns the building. I don't care when it was built. Somebody legally owns that building, and that's that person's property. Now, let's get into this because it's an interesting idea. You said that our dear friends Mark Ruffalo and Amy Schumer and others, you said they stopped the sale of this?
No, they're trying to. They're trying to prevent this.
How?
So,
legally stop it?
Yeah, I think they're pursuing it both in a public relations way as well as let's see.
I thought so.
If the story says they're going to court, yes, there's
they're not putting up their own money.
I got it. I thought so. I thought so. There's a way to do this. Actually, there's a way to preserve this structure, which I'm sure is worthwhile. And I'm in favor of keeping architecturally interesting buildings. And there's a way to do that, and a way to preserve their emotional attachment to this building and the heritage and all of the things that they talked about. And the way for these millionaires to protect this building is for them to pay $31 million and buy the damn building. And if they're not willing to do that, then they can just simply go away.
Well, let me just tell you, Bill, because you're on the right vein here, because they actually have started a crowdsourced fundraising campaign with a goal of raising $250,000, and so far they've raised some $16,000, of which about $1,000 of that came from Mark Ruffalo. So they're heading in that direction.
So he put $1,000 of his, how many movies has he done for the Marvel Universe? 6 or something is the Hulk, right? So this guy is going to say that you don't get to sell your own property. You're a church. You don't get to feed the hungry, because my emotional attachment to this building is worth $1,000 to me, and I've got tens of millions of dollars. This is the thing that makes my blood boil. If it had turned out that they really believed this, then Amy Schumer and Mark Ruffalo could have called a couple of their friends, could have scratched together $31 million, and everybody would have been happy, and I would have been applauding this decision, because that's how things work. You have something, I like it, you want to sell it? Yes. Well, I would prefer to get it myself. I'll offer you a better price. Ta-da! And everything works. But these people have the audacity to say this has a deep emotional meaning to me, and I'm ready to put up 1/8 of 1% of my net worth to make sure it's protected. How much can you contribute to make my dream, of having my old building come true? What a miserable, low-life swine. And this whole thing is just, we're going to lawfare our way into our desires instead of doing this the legal and moral way, which is certainly within their means. This is all you have to know about these people. They claim to be so deeply concerned about so many things, and they'll put bumper stickers on their car, and they'll have benefits to raise awareness. But when it comes time for them to actually contribute something that means something to them, some actual money or something like that, no, we'll crowdsource that. We'll use our prestige to get other people to pay for our little emotional attachment and make sure that the hungry people in New York stay hungry so long as I get to walk into a building that I think looks cool.
Well, way at the bottom of the story, it mentioned that the executive director of the center at West Park, this is this performance group that uses the church building to do stuff. They say, the executive director there says, we have anonymous donors willing to give up to $50 million. And by the way, that $50 million figure is the figure that would be required to get the building back into habitable condition, basically to get it to restore the building. So they say that they have donors willing to give up to $50 million, but the church congregants say that they have received no details of such a proposal. And so it sounds like they're saying this to the news media, but the church is saying essentially, show me the money. I mean, if we're going to take this money and help the poor, then we need to have guarantees, because we already have a developer with cash in hand who is saying that we'll give you $30 million for it. I thought that the whole story was, this supercilious actors who think that they somehow know better than the people who have called that congregation home for years, that they have a right to preserve the architecture of the entire community, basically, because they live there. Now, it didn't say what kinds of places Amy Schumer or Common or Mark Ruffalo or Wendell Pierce live in. My guess would be they live in apartments. I don't know if they have houses in that kind of a neighborhood. But in any case, I can see them wanting to preserve the beauty of such a building.
Me too.
It's interesting. I cannot see them saying we need to save this because we want a place to go on Sunday morning so that we can worship Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord. If that were their motivation, I could see that too. But for them, the church is not a church. The church is architecture. The church is a place to have theater groups come in and do their workshops. Years ago, I lived in a little town that had a theater, and for a long time, I had been talking to some friends about, like, what can we do? This theater is closed. It's been run down for years. It hasn't been used, and what can we do to kind of, can we buy it and like use it for retail space or something? At least maintain the facade and have it, because it's right there on the town square. And then all of a sudden, we found out that the heirs to the original owner intended to sell the place at auction, and that the most likely fate would be that it would be torn down and replaced with something functional there on the town square. After I read this story in the New York Times, it occurred to me, at no point did me or any of my friends go, "What? They're going to tear down the theater? We need to start a protest. We need to sue them. We need to, we need to get the PR generated so they don't tear down the theater." No, we immediately thought, well, what do they want? They want to get out from underneath the burden of owning this eyesore. They need money. They're the heirs, and they want to liquidate the estate. So instead of starting a protest movement, we started a not-for-profit organization that took in donations and ultimately succeeded at buying the building at auction and beginning the process of renovating and restoring the building. And that's, kind of what Bill said. It's like you have the means to be able to do the thing that you say that you value. Why instead would you decide to just make a stink about something? How hard would it be for a guy who has been in a number of Avengers movies, along with his other Hollywood pals, to walk in and say, I understand you have $30 million. By the way, $30 million in this case is the teardown price. $30 million is the price that you pay when you're going to completely wipe the building off the surface because it has no value whatsoever. That's the value of the land, minus demolition. And so come in there, like Bill said, with $32 million or whatever, and be able to transform that. So just the arrogance of this And the quote that really got my goat was Mark Ruffalo saying, "This is what I do, man. I speak for people who are being abused by a system that has kept them out, that doesn't give them a voice, that we never get to hear from." And I thought, no, Mark, you're doing this for you. And you have a voice, and you're part of the system. You are king capitalist. How is it possible? Who are the oppressed people here? As far as I can see, the oppressed people are the somewhat sad and pathetic people of a little congregation that has a building that has lost its purpose for which it was created, and are now trying to at least salvage something good out of it and do something good for their community. And let's pray that Mark Ruffalo and his Hollywood buddies somehow come to see that, either by making a substantial cash offer themselves or by stepping out of the way and letting history move forward. That would be a very progressive thing to do, wouldn't it? For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.